Would you like your very own tiny little possum? Well, you'll have to make it. I'll teach you how. You're going to need armature wire to make a skeleton, and then you're going to use some cotton wrapped wire for his little fingies and toes, his little paws. I started with a single piece of wire, made a loop, and then kind of looped another piece of wire around said loop. I did put little bends in between to kind of space the fingers so they wouldn't get all jammed up. When you go to trim the hands or the toes or whatever, make sure you don't cut them too short, because you will be adding wool to thicken up the paws, and that will make the fingers lose some of their length. You're going to make 4 of these bad boys, and you're going to attach them to the loops at the end of each limb on your armature, which I don't know that they had loops when I showed it to you earlier, but I added them. You can see it behind me right now. I also failed to show this on the video. You can see the cotton wires kind of unraveling a bit. I did use a little touch of hot glue to hold them in place. Once I've added both hands and feet, I'm ready to start actually felting. So I use 100% wool, undyed wool. It's cheaper than the dyed wool, so it saves money. And I begin wrapping it around the torso and using my felting needle to obviously stab it and compact it into place. How much time you spend felting this guy is up to you. If you do it kind of quick, you'll get a loosey-goosey sculpture. And if you take your time, like I spent a week on my guy, I really layered that wool and kept compacting it into itself, and you'll get a really sturdy sculpture that won't fall apart when you play with it. But it will do a number on your elbow, so, take your time. I spend a lot of time just building up the arms and legs at this point. I'm going to wrap it, stab it, wrap it, stab it. The needles do hurt when you poke yourself, so I don't show it in this. I don't know that I show it in this video, but they make little leather finger covers that protect your hands, and they do work really well. I do have some. I spent a lot of extra unnecessary time building up the bone of my possum, which I'm going to spoil now is pointless. You can't see it later once I add fur. So you can, for your own entertainment, give it a fine rump, but I'm warning you now that it might not be visible later. Maybe without the expectation, you won't end up heartbroken like me. Now to do the tail. Now here in this video, you're going to see me wrapping the metal tail quite a bit, and it's more than you think. Like, I'm going to start poking it down, and you'd think the tail would be wrapped after this. No, I don't know how many times I had to do this, but it was quite the process. Later, I decided this wire seemed kind of like a hazard. Like, what if they had their possum on the floor, and then the tail was poking up, and then they fell on the possum, right? I know that's a little bit paranoid, but, mom brain. So later, I decided to cut the end of the thicker wire off and replace it with this more bendable stuff so nobody's eye would get poked out, In order to add shapes, you usually just felt a ball of wool and then kind of add it on top like I do here. So in order to add the head, I felted a little ball of wool, and then I'm just going to, poke it into the body. And from there, I'll build a little snout, and I'll add a little cranium on top of that to start sculpting like a possum head. But from here, I jump straight to the next scene where his head is a firm, dome. You're going to have to add a lot of balls of wool. Look at that, we're on one more look before it's gone. You're gonna have to add a lot of balls of wool to get it to be like a firm head. Otherwise, it's just a squishy ball of hair, Because I am the queen of doing everything way harder than it needs to be, I felted my own little ears. But honestly, later I realized I could have just used like a felt sheet for this and cut out ears and attached it. So I felted little ears, and then I pinched them. And I didn't show this part, but then I, of course, poked them into the head of the little possum. And now I'm adding the nose with some peach fuzz, some peach dyed wool. In order to add the eyes, I felted some dents into its face where I wanted the eyes to go. And then I bought these little plastic, I don't know what you'd call them. They're probably called doll eyes, I'm sure. And I just glued them in there. I just popped them in there with some hot glue. And they've held up. So that apparently is a good system. And here he is, kind of oh, I didn't show this either. He's got some peach wool in his mouth to give it some more dimension or whatever. Now he's ready for some fur. So I actually used black and white and then just kind of blended it because I think that's a little more accurate to a possum than straight up gray fur. But if you want to save some time, use some gray dyed wool. I cut the wool a bit shorter for this part, so I'm not wasting as much because I'm going to be trimming it pretty short. I probably could have even cut it even shorter, but, you know, I don't want it to be so short that it gets stabbed into the possum instead of sticking out. You've got two edges that now will stick out, and then I trim it with some scissors. Probably my favorite part, giving him a little haircut. I took a break from adding the fur because I realized I wanted to paint his fingers and toes to be pink. So I got some fabric paint and I blended up like a peachy pink and painted his fingers and toes. You could probably use acrylic. I just think fabric paint, it doesn't come off as easily with movement, you know, it doesn't stiffen it up, so helpful, I guess. Possum arms and legs generally are black, so I took some black wool, cut it into little segments, and then poked it into his arms and trimmed it up with some scissors until it was fuzzy. Adding the fur is probably the most fun part because it's quicker than the rest of the sculpture, and obviously now he's really coming alive. His personality's really popping. I'm always unsure how felters make any money because this has got to be the most time-consuming process there is in art, but definitely so cool. You couldn't make this sort of stuff with sewing or anything else. Here I'm adding some tan to the tail, and I didn't record it, but I also did sew on the tummy. I mixed in or blended in more white for the fur that as it went down the knees and around the tummy to make it a lighter gray. Final step is to clean up his face and give him a little haircut. I did add some more white around the edges just to blend that out a little bit better. And he's done. I actually made this little guy to be a part of an advent calendar for my two daughters. They both got their own little possum, and I made them like a den and accessories, which I'll be posting those videos here in the future if you want to see how I made those. But this is the finished possum. He's fully posable. His neck, tail, limbs all move, and he's really strong.